Okay, thanks, Christine. And hello out there. And I'm going to go and hide behind the PowerPoint in a couple minutes. But actually, before we get started, just, again, welcome. My name is Robert Karatsu, and I just realized, looking at the names of people there, a lot of you probably have no idea who I am. So let me give you a little bit of a background here. Currently I am the project manager for the Developing Leaders in California Libraries program. But before that, in my previous life, I was actually the director of the Rancho Cucamonga Public Library. And we actually won the National Medal in 2013. In 2015, I was the CLA president. And then currently, I am actually very proudly a library commissioner here in Pasadena. And I am actually a lecturer also at the UCLA iSchool. And as far as when it comes to budgets, I've done a lot of them, and I really like doing it. And maybe because I've always thought I was very good with numbers, and I think if you ask the people that I worked with, they probably would tell you I was better with numbers than I was with people. So, we'll see. But really what I wanted to do today is just, try to demystify the whole budget process, because I know especially some of you newer library workers out there may not have a lot of experience working with a budget. So I'm going to try to explain what it is, how it works within the context of a library. But also, I think as important, I want to just try to tell you a few things that I personally see as a former library director, how the COVID-19 it will affect your budget. So, let's get started here if you don't mind. And I'm going to pull up the PowerPoint again. So here we go. All right, so before we actually get into the whole budget thing, I'm going to talk a little bit just about some basic, I'm going to call them budget tenets. The first one is that budgets are not top secret. They're readily available. And, for example, for those of you that are like sitting in your library right now, look at your reference list, right? You're going to see these big old binders there that say budget on them. Have you ever looked at them? Probably not, huh? But, they're there. Or if not, well, then just Google your library's name or your city's name, your county's name, and the word budget, and it will come up, because to prep for this particular webinar, I probably looked at maybe 40 or 50 different either city, county, library, special district budgets. And, I would say, 80% of them were just very clear and very easy to find. So, and, I'll be real honest with you too. I will not have my feelings hurt if right now you're walking over and you're grabbing one of these budgets, or you're Googling your own budget, just so you can get an idea of what it is that I'm talking about. In fact, I would encourage you to do that if you want to kind of follow along. And another thing about budgets, I've always found that, at least my staff always seem to think that the budget was like the domain of the director or the management analyst. And yeah, maybe those are the people that, kind of understand it and work with it, but that's not any reason why you should not be aware of at least of what's in it and just some of the basic things. So what I'm going to try to do today is explain or tell you, if you just want to know 2 or 3 things about your particular budget, these are the things that I would be looking at. I'm going to say that budgets are not complicated. They can, some cities, if you look at their budgets, because unfortunately, when you download them, some of them are like these 600-page PDF files and takes you forever to get through or to find what you want. But no, I really don't think they're all that complicated. So what I'm going to try to do is just, simplify it and, again, tell you some of the things that you should or could be looking for when you decide to start looking more seriously at your particular budget. A few budget concepts to keep in mind for those of you that work in a public library, for example, either in a city or a county. You are just one little piece of a bigger budget. And this is a real example of actually a very large city here in Southern California. And, you're just basically just a piece of the pie. And this concept I'm going to bring back a little bit later, so keep that in mind. Another concept to keep in mind is that things do not equal 100%. And for now, just again, remember that. And it's going to make a little bit more sense when we actually start looking at a couple of real budgets here. Another thing to keep in mind that every budget is a little bit different. But what I'm going to try to do is just emphasize the things that budgets have in common. And, you know, you're going to see that, oh, okay, our budget has that. He was talking about that. I see it, you know, what the amount is, or, you know, some things like that. Yeah, that's obviously it's going to be different from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but there are some things in common, and those are the things I'm going to try to focus on. And then the last point that I really want to make is that, you know, pretending there's not going to be any problems with your budget in the future, I don't think that's a good idea, because there probably are going to be some problems. Well, and by the way, in fairness to ostriches, I found out, fun fact, that, yeah, they don't do that to hide their head. Their eggs are down there. They can't fly up in a tree and lay some eggs. So that's why they put them underground. And this ostrich is checking up on her babies at the moment. So, but, you know, the concept is, you know, don't hide your head in the sand about your budget. I think maybe now more than ever, you want to try to learn more about it. Anyway, let's get started here. We're going to talk about budgets here. And what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to start first with a real world example of a budget that hopefully I think you can all relate to. So I think everyone hopefully has their own personal budget, right? And it's composed of income. You know, this is just money that you bring in, and your expenses, things that you spend stuff on. So for example, income, job, obviously the first thing. Yeah, maybe you've got some investments, so you're pulling in some interest off of that. Some of you may have some side hustles. You know, you're working part-time at another library, drive for Lyft, or, you know. Some of you may have actually some, you know, maybe kind of more exotic forms of income, things like, I don't know, alimony perhaps, or maybe you're a trust fund baby. You know, things like that. And, you know, don't laugh, because there are some libraries that I found have some pretty interesting sources of income just poking around in their budgets. But anyway, that's your income. That's money that's coming in. And then your expenses, you know, things that go out. I think the first thing you always need to account for are your fixed expenses, right? Things like your rent or your mortgage, your utilities, you have a car payment, auto insurance, homeowners insurance, your Netflix subscription, your, you know, all of those kind of things. They're pretty fixed. And then you're also going to have some expenses on top of that, you know, they're mandatory, but they're not necessarily fixed. So, for example, I think food is the best example, or entertaining, or vacations. Yeah, when times are good, you're going to splurge. You're going to drink a little bit more, maybe go on a nicer vacation. And maybe when times are tough, well then, you know, sorry, we're going to have to cut back and eat ramen for the next 2 weeks. So, you know, again, but you do have some control over your expenses. And when it comes to budgets, I think, you know, bottom line, if you're bringing in more money than you're spending, that's good. If you're spending more money than you're bringing in, that's bad. And, you know, that's simple, right? So I hope you're all still with me here, because a library budget isn't all that different. I think Michelle Pereira put that slide in here. But anyway, okay, let's get to the library stuff. And the first thing we're going to look at is your income, where the money is coming from. And at least within libraries, there's, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 different places where revenues are. Most common, you're in the general fund. This would be applied to county libraries or municipal city libraries. And I'll talk about where the money comes into the general fund in a bit, but basically there's this big pot in the city or the county, and it just gets divided up. police, you get this much, fire, you get this much, library, this is for you. And you're all kind of fighting over this general fund money because it's not really designated to any specific thing. It's just, you know, when you do your budget negotiations, that's when you decide who gets what. Property tax is a pretty common way to fund libraries within counties, especially in that there's just designated property taxes that are supposed to specifically going to a library. In the library I worked at previously, yes, it was a recipient of property tax. So, you know, that's probably the most common way that libraries are going to get a dedicated piece of funding if they're not in the general fund. Some libraries actually have library taxes, specific library taxes, or they've passed measures. I mean, off the top of my head, I know that here in Pasadena, there is a library tax. City of Oakland, they just did one. I believe Sacramento last year, they did a measure for the library. And there are these things. Berkeley, I think, is a good example of a library tax. Now, the thing to keep in mind with these library taxes is that it doesn't necessarily cover all of the budget. It's usually just a piece of it. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. There are these special districts out there. I mean, some examples: Altadena, Banning, Belmont, Placentia, Buena Park. Those are just some that I, right off the top of my head, that are down here in Southern California. And what a special district is they're its own, basically like a little city. They receive dedicated funds just only for the library. It gets assessed, and the people that live in this district pay this library special district tax, and that's used to fund the library. It's generally, I think, based on property tax, but it's going specifically 100% to the library. Oh, actually, the other thing about the special district, it's only the library. I mean, there could be a lighting district or there could be a fire district, but you know, they're getting their own special funds. In the library special districts, they're getting their own dedicated funds. There's something called a joint powers agreement. There are a few of these in the state. I know there's one in Santa Clara County, San Mateo County is one of them. Sacramento is one, and down here, I was looking at Belvedere, Tiburon. I don't even know where that is, but I know they've got a joint powers agreement. And again, these are just individual cities that are basically coming together, and they're going to say, you know, we're going to do the library. And generally, they're getting their funding from property taxes. But again, it's very defined, and these cities are signing an agreement to work together to provide library service. A little bit different concept than what the counties are doing. Another example of funding is, and I'm going to call these side hustles. It's just, I guess, my word, but a lot of libraries have these side hustles. So besides getting the general fund or the property tax or within a special district, they're coming up with their own ways to get revenues. Some real common ones that I think a lot of you are aware of and you're probably doing. Passports. I mean, there's money to be made there. Some of you have these developer impact fees. You know, good for you if you're doing that. Some libraries, you collect fines and fees, and that goes into your budget. I know in the library that I used to work at, yeah, that was a line item, and I'm going to actually show you that a little bit later. But you know, if you wonder why not every library wants to go fine-free, well, some libraries are using this as a source of their funding. So, you know, they probably would have to think twice about doing things like that. But I mean, there are other things, your friends, your foundation, you do room rentals, you know, you charge for people to borrow your media. Yeah, those are all little, calling them library side hustles. But then looking at the budgets of just some other random jurisdictions, I found some other really, I thought, interesting sources of revenue. One of them, there's actually a library up north that they're in charge of their cemetery. The city has a cemetery, and somehow the services for that was put under the library, and they are getting revenues for that. I'm going to assume that they just contract out all of whatever the cemetery services are, but I just thought, okay, that's an interesting source of revenue. Some libraries actually have things called book funds. One example I found was that, I don't know, in 2000, someone donated $1.2 million to the library. And they said, you know, this is a book fund specifically for this library, but you cannot use that principal, that 1.2, whatever interest, you know, gets generated off of that. Well, then that's what you can spend. But I thought, okay, that's a nice passive way to earn, you know, some income, even though the interest rates are basically zero now. So that book fund is not generating a lot of cash, but it still has that principal. And then the best side hustle that I saw one library come up with, they're part of the cannabis tax in their city. So yeah, they're getting those dirty $100 bills, I suspect. But I just thought, okay, I really like that idea that libraries, you know, at least one library in California is, you know, getting a little bit of money from cannabis. And then, you know, there were some libraries, I have no idea how you're getting your money, but that this would apply, at least from what I can tell, to special libraries. And I think maybe there's a couple of you that are out there doing that, or some school libraries too, just could not find out where your funding was coming from. Oh, and I was going to say that for the academic libraries, or the, first of all, the community college libraries, they're real similar to a special district. They've basically set up things, and they've got basically a dedicated funding source that looked like it was voted on by the residents of that particular district. And then the state colleges and universities, a lot of them, I mean, like, they're dependent upon tuition. And also that they do get state funding as well. Some have a lot of endowments, some have a lot of grants. I was looking at, for example, at UCLA, their biggest side hustle is the medical center. That thing is throwing off all kind of income for them. So, you know, again, just a way for them to make money. So those are some funding examples, but let me get back to this concept of not 100%, because I mentioned some libraries are getting, for example, these library taxes. I know here in Pasadena, that tax, which has been renewed again, but it only covers, I believe it's 21% of the total budget. So the city is still, you know, in the general fund for basically, what, 79%? Could be a little bit less. Oakland, I believe your tax measure covers about, what, 25% of your total budget. So again, you've got to find where that other 75% is coming from. Some of you that get property tax, it's not necessarily funding you at 100%. And I looked at a couple of county budgets to see, and when just like doing the math, some of them added up to maybe 70, 75%. So again, you're still getting something maybe from the general fund, or you're also, you know, looking to do these side hustles, things like passports, or, you know, whatever other ways that you can find to add revenues. Grants, I forgot to mention grants, but that's another good way to just add to the revenues of your particular library. But anyway, keep that in mind, that the funding doesn't always equal 100%. And if you're really interested in just data about libraries, the state library has their statistical portal. I love this thing. I mean, but you know, I love numbers, so maybe that's why. And there are two things to keep in mind about the data that's on the portal. One is that it's always going to be a year behind. So the most recent they have is 18-19, one. And then two, all of this, the data that's there is self-reported. And as someone who used to actually do and submit the library statistics to the state, you know, some of the stuff may have been a little bit fudged. Although I will say that the budget numbers, those were all, you know, strictly correct. But anyway, if you go to the portal, this is what it actually looks like. You can actually get an Excel spreadsheet and just download everything here. And one thing that I did, just, you know, to show you the screenshot kind of thing, is I hid a lot of the formula. So, you know, you can see there's A, B, C, and then it goes all the way up to U, because D through, you know, whatever were things like the, I don't know, the address, the library director's middle name, the phone number, the fax number. But, you know, as you moved on to the right too, you would see more things about, not only things about budget, but, you know, for example, the staff expenditures, you could see just part-time staff, full-time staff, benefits. And if you kept moving to the right, there's all kind of just, you know, like circulation stat, hours open, I personally think it's real interesting. You know, if you want to compare yourself to other libraries where you cannot find your budget anywhere, you know, this one's up there. It's out there. And the one thing that I would look at here, and we'll talk about this again a little bit more, is column C, the library type. And this will tell you that, you know, who's municipal, who's a county with a dedicated tax, who's just in the county's general fund. You can see there's a couple of special districts, there's a joint powers there. So, you know, but there's a lot of stuff. And I'm going to come back to this chart a little bit later, right there. So if you know, again, if you're on the state library's website, go to the statistical portal, download this Excel sheet and, you know, have fun with it. Okay, so right now I'm going to show you a real library budget. I actually crossed out the name, but you can probably guess who this is. And just wanted to show you a few things about when it comes to revenues. And, you know, basically you know, I could find this on your library's budget too, I would think. At least I was able to find it in a lot of libraries' budgets. It shows you, this is the revenues. This is where the money is coming from. And this particular city, I mean, it's mostly property tax. And they're out of what, 4.7 million, 3.6 is from property tax. And oh, if you want to know the difference between secured and unsecured, secured is like property tax on the houses. Unsecured are for things like boats, mobile home parks, and some furniture that's in some office buildings. But you know, you'll see there's money from property tax. That's what, about 77% if I did the math right. But then this library has some side hustles. I talked about library fines and fees. They budgeted, well, this is back in 2017, but $180,000 just for that. This library is earning interest on something. And when I see this in other libraries' budgets and they say there's interest earning, they've got some reserve fee somewhere, some big old bank account. And if something's kicking off $36,000 in interest, I think the principal's probably, you know, it's a pretty decent chunk of money there. They charge for media rentals, at least they did. Passport fees. I mean, this is what, 2 years ago. I know this number's probably doubled since then. Grant. I know they get a lot more grants than that too, but when they make the budget, they forecasted, yeah, we'll be conservative. We're only going to do 43,000 this year. And then they have two things finally down at the bottom. The private contributions. I know for a fact that's the Friends. Their Friends are good for at least that year, $130,000. And then they also have a foundation. Again, they're $60,000. But you know, if you wanted to just read this particular chart, I mean, use the example of the foundation support. Just read across to the right. It says budget. MTD is just the month to date. It's how much they got, you know, in that past month. And then the next one is the year to date. And so, you know, they budgeted they were going to get $60,000, and they've already gotten $98,000 in that 1 month. Probably because it was December. It was a Christmas present. And so, you know, the year they've got $98,000, and you keep going across the balance. In this case, a red number is good. They exceeded their revenue projections. I mean, let's go back up to the top when you look at this property tax secured. When you move across for the month to date, you know, they've only got $108,000 out of 3.6 million, and the year to date is only what, 280. So they've got a huge balance to go. But one thing to keep in mind, for example, with property taxes, if you're looking at something like this, I wouldn't worry, because the property tax gets, at least where I live in LA County, is in December, end of December and the end of April. So if you looked at this thing maybe in May, those numbers are going to be completely changed. But depending on when you get your property taxes, that, you know, it'll reflect that way. Okay, so that's an example of a budget. Now I'm going to show you a few more a little bit later here, but the budget process. Okay, so in a normal time, this is how the budget process would work. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about, you know, in the time of COVID. So normally what happens, budget time, you're going to say, it's time to do the budget. Then your city manager, your county CEO, what they're going to do is they're going to say, oh, we're going to have these community focus groups, or, every director has to come up with key indicators for their department, or come up with some performance matrices. And then we're going to base the budget on, these things that you come up with and what our community is saying that they want. I think there's some library directors out there. I can hear you groan at that, because, really, in my experience, what happens is, we're asked to do all of those things, but really what, happens is that the finance director and or the city manager or the county CEO is going to basically say to you and, the police chief and the fire chief and, whoever else is at the table, this is how much money you're going to get for this year. And generally it's based on what you got last year. They may increase it, if the economy went well, 3, 4, or 5%. If things didn't go well, they may say, well, we're going to be flat, or you're going to just get deducted, plan to cut 5%. So, that's really what happens with the budget process. And, you want to keep in mind when this is happening that, you're not the only person that's in that room fighting for the scraps. But, let's talk about a little bit more about, who else is in the room. When that budget negotiation is going on, they're all in there. And again, look how small this particular jurisdiction, how much is going to library services, 3%. That's common. I was thinking between 3 and 5%. Didn't matter if you were a county, you were a city, that's what you were going to get. And, the police and the fire are getting pretty much everything else. Okay, let's talk about a little bit of a reality check now in the time of COVID, because in normal times, they're going to give you a dollar amount. And you're going to have to figure out, well, how are we going to make this work? You may have had some great ideas for, I want to hire, a new makerspace librarian, or I want to, we need a new bookmobile, or whatever, this new program that we're going to set up. But, with the reality check right now is that, things are going to get real tight. And the reason why is because of the revenues. Like right now, if, let's say you lost your job, well, then all of a sudden, well, how am I going to pay for the rent? How am I going to pay for the food? All of those kind of things are suddenly going to come into play. And the same thing is happening in your jurisdictions right now, as far as depending on where your revenues are coming from. If you're in a special district, you may not have to worry about this so much, because maybe you've already collected your revenues for the year, and so wait until September, whenever that next bill goes out. But you seem to be okay. A lot of, I think, the libraries that are doing get property tax money. I kind of think you're going to be okay for a while, because people, when they start defaulting on their houses, well, then that's when the property taxes are going to start going down. But assuming they paid it in December, and they paid it, this most recent one in April, if you're getting 60, 70, 80% of your revenues from property tax, you might be okay. But if you're really dependent upon, for example, your jurisdiction on sales tax, on hotel occupancy taxes, it could be kind of tight. And let's look at, again, this is another real city. I think this one is down here in Southern California. But you can see that 35% of the revenues are coming from property tax. And I know this particular city has a lot of hotels as well. So they do have that transient, the hotel occupancy tax. Again, those things have got to be hurting. And so when those revenues go down, one, the city, in this particular case, has less money to spend. And then the other thing, that if the library in this particular jurisdiction is basically 100% from the general fund, well, then there's just less money all of a sudden. So, I think some decisions may have to be made. And then even with your library, your side hustles, right? If you're not open, no one's getting passports, right? or no one's paying their fines and fees, you're probably waiving all of those things right now anyway. So your friends' donations, those are probably non-existent as well. So if you have a bookstore, for example, so you're going to have to keep that in mind, that when these revenues are falling like now, at least in the short term. I don't know in the long term what things are going to be changing perhaps, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about how some cities, counties are, I think, maybe going to be able to weather at least some of the effects of the COVID right now. And then again, to just keep in mind that you're not in this whole budget battle alone. The police and the fire people and the parks and the recs and public works are all saying, well, their revenues are going down, but they still, in a lot of cases, they still need to operate. I think the police, fire, those things are still going to happen. So, their revenues may be going down or to pay them. So where's your jurisdiction going to find the revenues for that? Kind of a sobering thought, right? But all right, let me I'm going to put my library director, my old library director's hat back on for a little bit, and just look at if things have to start, decisions need to be made. Well then, maybe this is where they're going to have to be made. Let's look at the expenses now of this library. This is where a library I'm particularly familiar with, where the money is going out to. And you can see that, again, a real typical looking budget. On the far left, you have something called an object, that number 5,000, that, it's the fund, and then it's got the name of it, and then you can see how much money is there. So, for example, with this particular library, you can see the salaries, fringe benefits, we have a travel and meeting, and all of your libraries are going to probably have something real similar to this, right? Training, mileage, operation and maintenance, contract services. So, those are, the library fund is also this is the administration part of the library. So there aren't any part-time people or things like that in there, and they're paying the utilities and the water for the entire library system. Right below it, an example, the literacy services. Again, you got your salaries and you have travel and meetings. And then the next one, this is an example of just one of the branch libraries. You can see their salaries. This one has actually part-time people, fringe benefits. They have a travel and meeting budget. The big one is the $5,200, the operation and maintenance. It's $282,000. It's where the books are coming from, the supplies. And most of your libraries, that's going to be the second biggest line item that you're going to have in your particular library. They do have something called contract services. That's going to pay for like maintenance agreements for maybe your vendors. It could also be for if you have a security guard contract, things like that. But then that's basically what a budget goes to, and you're going to see that in most budgets. In fact, in all the budgets that I was looking at when it comes to library, it's basically made up of people. It's made up of books. In this particular case, those salaries, the fringe benefits, and the O&M, the operations and maintenance. And your jurisdictions make all these things a little bit differently, but in essence, that's what they are. They're books and they're people. Okay, so let's go back to the portal, the statistics thing, and I'm going to try to just show you a couple things that I found that's real common with libraries in the state of California. And again, these are public libraries. And when you look at it, the two things that in this particular spreadsheet I was basically focusing on is right here. Your total budget, that's AG, and then how much you're spending on your staff. And since this is Excel, you can do some really easy, fun things. So what I did just to see what it looked like was that I just divided the staff expenses into the total operating. And you come up with a staff ratio, and you can see how much a particular library, at least in 2018, with spending just on staff. And this would include part-time and benefits. So, 70, almost 73%. Next one's only 58%, 53. But then the other column that I also threw into the mix, because again, if I was having to be a library director and maybe started to look at where there is places to cut, would be in the collection. So again, just added that into the mix. So when you add up all the people and basically all the books, you can get a percentage of how much a particular library, at least in this case, public libraries, are spending on those particular categories. And, again, if you're a special district library, it's going to be different because I'm going to assume that at least for now, your revenues are probably still pretty stable. And again, if you're one of those, the joint powers agreement libraries, I think your revenues are probably going to be, a little bit more stable than the libraries that are in general funds, because again, you've got this dedicated property tax that is only to be used for library purposes. So, if you've collected that, or if you're one of these, a county with a dedicated tax, depending on how much that tax is as a percentage of your revenues, you're probably going to be okay. But if you're 100% in the general fund, you may have another situation on your hands as far as, well, what are we going to do, or how are we going to move forward here? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, now that you're here, well, what can I do? Things are tough, and often the game has changed. One question I've been asked before is, well, can we become a special district? Or, how do we get out of the general fund and, get the property tax, a percentage of that to our library? Those things take forever to do. I'm not real sure that, you're obviously not going to be able to do something like that in the next 2 or 3 months. So fortunately, that's kind of wishful thinking. I found that if I were going to be a library director and I really wanted to look at a new side hustle, besides if I weren't doing, and realistic, if you're doing passports, that's 2% of your budget, 1%. It's not a lot, but it's better than nothing. But I'd probably be looking at doing some kind of a tax. Can you pass it? I mean, they still got that threshold that you have to get, but and you're going to have to work on that thing for a year or two. But that's the first thing that I would probably be thinking about. Well, because you can do that, because I've seen libraries like Pasadena did it, Oakland did it, Sacramento did it, Berkeley does it. So, depending on the value that your community puts on your library, well then, maybe that's a good thing. And to look at some kind of a library tax moving forward. Other things that can you do? A common thing that people ask is, how do you transfer funds between those line items that I was talking about? For example, typical library, we haven't had any part-time people in for the last 2 months, 3 months. So we haven't touched that budget and we haven't been paying those people. So can I use that money for, I don't know, to buy plexiglass shields and book sanitizing machines? I would probably say that the short answer there would be no. Usually that the personnel money that are in a budget, they're supposed to be used for personnel. Not saying that you can't transfer things out, but if you do, you're going to need the permission of, not only your library director's got to sign off on this, but probably your finance director is going to have to sign off on something like that, and then your city manager, depending on the amount. Because the reason why you just can't willy-nilly change the budgets anytime you feel like it is because your city council, your county board of supervisors, formally approve these things as you submitted them. And if you just start changing these things behind their back, I think that's a good way to, I don't know, get on the cover of your local newspaper for doing something bad. And you don't want to do that. So, those are just the safeguards that they put into these budgets and those line items so that you can't start just moving these things around. Another thing that someone asked me is, you got a grant from the state library. As to say, again, it's to do a makerspace program. Yeah, we haven't been open. We haven't been able to work on this. So can I use this money to pay for staff? Hold on a second here. The answer is don't even think about doing something like that. Well, unless you never want to get a state grant ever again. And, you know, again, if you want to end up on the cover of your local newspaper for just doing something that it's basically, you know, not cool to do. So if there's a dedicated fund for something, there's a reason why it's dedicated, and you have to use it for that particular fund. All right, back behind the PowerPoint. Another thing that people ask about is, let's say your library was in the middle of a renovation, getting a new carpet, you know, you're getting a new HVAC system, and all of a sudden the COVID hits. You know, can your city or county stop working on your particular project? Again, no, that money is dedicated to what it is that it was budgeted for. So if it was for a carpet, you know, capital improvement to renovate your library, well then, you know, that's what it's got to happen, and it's going to keep going on. And I've been in like recessions where a brand new library has been built, and when you come out, you know, when it finally opens, you know, you don't have the money to staff it. You know, so it seems kind of funny to have this brand new building, but you know, again, that's just the reality of budget. So you got to keep that in mind when you have these capital improvement plans. Next thing, so, you know, what if things change in the course of the budget? And again, in normal times, what normally would happen is that mid-year, generally if your budget year starts in July, usually it's around March, they do something called a mid-year adjustment. And they just, you know, they look at your spending categories. And if you're overspent in some areas, they're going to ask you, well, why are you overspent here? And, you know, most of those things are real easy. You can say, well, we budgeted a majority of our fund, you know, program fund for summer reading, and it happened in the summer. So, you know, now we're done, and we're not going to be spending very much money. But, you know, you make those adjustments in it, and you fine tune your budget. You move things around. But now, you know, again, with the COVID, you know, it's just, you know, it's really a brand new kind of world out there as far as, you know, how you're going to reallocate your budget. And again, this is something that, you know, I would assume as we speak, if they haven't already done it already, your library directors have been looking at this, you know, looking at the personnel budget to see if we haven't spent money in this particular area. Can we spend it for something else? You know, I don't think a lot of you have been buying any books lately, but, you know, something you're probably going to want to be thinking about when you reopen is you're going to have to buy things that were never a million years in your budget you thought about, right? Things like, you know, the book sanitizing machine, for example, masks, gloves, a whole bunch of new signage, plexiglass shields for your desk. I mean, hand sanitizers, you name it, you know, think about those kind of things. You probably have the money, you know, you didn't buy the book, so, you know, you probably, I'm gonna say you can use those operation and materials budget, you know, that you thought you were gonna do for books to buy these kind of supplies, because, you know, you're gonna need them, and it's gonna be something that should be really easy to justify. But again, it's just something that you wanna think about that, and I'm going to assume that these are the kind of things that your library directors are thinking about right now. And, you know, hopefully you're getting, if you don't necessarily have input, at least you're getting updates on really what is going on, and, you know, the status of your city, your county, the revenues. Even if you're in a special district, if you're in a JPA, you know, they probably wouldn't hurt to know what's going on. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that maybe at the very end. But then the last thing we're just going to talk about when it comes to budgets is, you know, what if at the end of the year you don't spend everything that you had budgeted? I'm going to talk about in normal times. Some places, I know, for example, in a library I used to work at, you could actually keep a reserve fund. They call it a fund balance, perhaps. And, you know, so there wasn't a lot of pressure to spend every penny. But I do know that there are municipal libraries and there are county jurisdictions that if you don't spend it, it's just going right back into the general fund of the county. So, you know, it's probably in your interest to spend everything because one, you spend everything, but two, the other thing it kind of does is if you don't spend all the money that was budgeted for you, yeah, maybe you're sending a message that you really didn't need all that money, right? So, you know, you want to try to keep that in mind is, you know, when it starts getting down to crunch time, how are we going to spend everything? Well, then think about that. But if you are one of those fortunate libraries that can keep a reserve, and I've seen, again, looking through some libraries' budgets, some of the county libraries that have a dedicated tax, property tax, yeah, it looks like they're able to keep some kind of a reserve. I saw some municipal libraries that have some pretty decent reserves. And if nothing else, you want to look and see if your city or your county, you know, your big city, your big county, they have a reserve fund. Some budgets I looked at, you know, they were mandated to have, you know, 20% of their operating budget in reserve. So they had this rainy day kind of fund. But again, I saw some cities and some counties, they had nothing. You know, they're already worried about like the pension spiking and, you know, issues like that and running a deficit. And this was before the COVID happened. So, you know, again, wow, that, you know, it could be tough. So, you know, hopefully you've got these reserves as well. And if not, if your specific, you know, library doesn't have it, your city does. And, you know, they may be willing to help you out when it comes to maybe when you need some emergency funding. Okay, so again, a reality check. And, you know, basically what I wanted to say is that it's tough, you know, it's a lot of unknowns. And again, you know, your library director or, you know, your management, I'm going to assume they're working on these things right now. There are going to be some things that they cannot tell you about. That's going to be confidential. I think it's one thing if you ask them a question, they say no, or, you know, they don't answer you. But if they tell you it's actually confidential, you know, and it's still being discussed at, you know, a level above them, you've got to believe them because, you know, there are these real hard conversations that are going on that, you know, at the moment, unfortunately, you're not going to be privy to. As a director, you know, I've had to tell people, you know, unfortunately, I can't talk about that right now because it's, you know, it's confidential or it's still in, you know, progress. But I also tried to do as much as possible as once I did know something that was ready for my city managers who said, yes, you can tell your staff. Yep, I would absolutely do it because, you know, I think it's a good idea that, you know, if you're informed, well then, yeah, it's stressful and not knowing things, you know, can be maybe the most stressful thing of all. I had a question, someone said, well, have you ever, you know, seen a situation like we're in right now? And I mean, as old as I am, no, I was not around during, you know, the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic or during the Middle Ages for the Black Plague. And, you know, really to me, those are the things that are, you know, kind of the closest things that I can think of. I mean, I was around for I was a director in 2007 or 2008 when they had that recession. I mean, and that was bad. And I did have to make cuts of, I think, up to maybe 15, 18% of the budget. But, you know, are bigger cuts than that going to have to be made now? I don't know. It's you know, tough because it's just, I don't know the answer to those kind of things because in some ways, maybe, you know, one possibly good thing about the COVID is it's a relatively short term kind of thing. It may take a long time to recover from it, but I mean, who knows, once the stores open back up again, you know, maybe your sales taxes are going to just go back to where they were before. I don't know. It probably could take a little while to do it, but, you know, there is that hope that that kind of thing, you know, your sales tax, people are going to start staying at your hotels again. You know, hopefully people have not gone into bankruptcy, so they're still going to continue to pay their property taxes. But, you know, we're just going to have to see what happens. And then the last thing I'm going to do, and then I'm going to open it up to questions. So if you want to ask a question, put it in the chat box, and I'm going to see if I can go through it and I can find it. Is that something that people ask me about as far as, again, with libraries moving forward? Well, based on those conversations I had with some of the leading library directors around the state of California, someone asked me, well, what most impressed you about what it is that some of them were saying? And to me, the things that I was hearing that impressed me, well, okay, God, I hate to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think it's really good that people are looking at things like, curbside pickup and these virtual story time. But at the same time, in my mind, these are basically doing, the same old things we always used to do. You're just doing it in a new way. And, that's great. I think, it's commendable that you're thinking outside of the box. Is this innovation? I don't know, I think it's being pretty creative, but to me, the things that really impressed me when I was listening to some of the other directors talk were those that were doing things, that were doing new things that, libraries have never done before. I was real impressed with the ones that were doing, for example, the contact tracing. I like the idea of, people that were using their maker spaces to make face shields. I know one of the libraries, they were talking about how they were providing services to immigrants who are undocumented and who are really suffering during these times. I thought, wow, that's something that's brand new, and I thought that was really cool. But these were the kind of things that resonate to me now. But if I were still working, I think these are the kind of things that are going to resonate with your city administrators, your county CEOs. That you're really doing something. And then also the directors, and I know more than one of them were talking about, they wanted to be a part of figuring out how their library was going to be a part of the recovery, whether it's economic, and I really do see opportunities for libraries here if you want to try to reinvent or do a recovery of what the concept of community is. Because there's new rules now, but if you can figure out what community look like now, and you can fill that void, yeah, you've become an essential service, at least in my book. And I think it would be something that would be relatively easy to sell to the people that are funding you. And so when you're going back to that negotiating table to ask for more money because the sales tax is dropped off, who knows? That is at least the angle I would be taking if I were still in the game. So with that, I am going to actually open things up for questions here, and I'm going to look at the chat and see if anything has come in here as far as questions. Well, one funny question. Do you miss being a library director now? No, I do not. I think I can actually honestly say that I would be willing to get back into the game just because I think I could bring value to the conversation. But to be real honest with you, just getting up in the morning, and this is before the COVID, it's work. If I'm out of bed before 8:30 in the morning, I'm up early for some reason. I used to get on my pages cases for wearing like Metallica t-shirts or their Tupac shirt. But when I'm sitting around wearing what's this t-shirt, and not very professional for a library director to do that. So no, I don't miss that part of it. What do you do about how can you get maybe information from your administration? Maybe in your opinion or your perspective, it's not coming down to you. This is maybe what I would do. I think it's maybe a good idea. Say that, the other day I heard this webinar with someone named Robert Karatsu, and he was just talking about things like funding sources and things like that. If you're just not clear about how your library is funded, I think that's a legitimate question. there. You know, you want to ask a question. You don't want to challenge your people when you're doing this. But I really do things like that. I mean, you know, frame it. You know, put the burden on me. Say I said some things that weren't clear. So can you please clarify this for me? And you know, maybe that will get the conversation started. You know, again, don't ask them things like, "Is my job safe?" Because they can't tell you that kind of stuff right now. Because, you know, and again, they're still working on a lot of confidential type of, you know, things that they cannot share. But, you know, if you have maybe more basic kind of things about your funding sources, or maybe, you know, you can ask, well, what are you hearing from the conversations at City Hall, or, you know, whatever it is. Yeah, you know, maybe that would be a way to kind of tease it out. But if you want to use me as, you know, that reason to do it, I'm perfectly fine with that. Yeah, a question about, is there a standard collection budget for libraries of a certain size? No, I mean, PLA a long time ago had these standards, but they were so unrealistic that, you know, I don't think they were really, they weren't based in reality. I think what I would do is go back to that spreadsheet. Well, let me see if I can find it real quick. This one here. If you look at the total collection, I mean, if you just subtracted what 80% from 73%, this particular library is spending about 7% on their materials. I mean, this is not just books. I believe this also would include your databases and your supplies. So, I mean, I don't want to pick on anyone. Here's one that's spending, you know, 9.65% on their collections. You know, that's not bad. If you're only spending, you know, 2%, that's probably not so good. But, you know, again, just as a, you know, a way to see what other libraries are doing, this is a really easy way, I think. Actually, if you want the spreadsheet, I'll send it to you. Just, you know, send me your email address afterwards, and I would be more than happy to. I mean, it's on the State Library's website. This is just something that I did in Excel to kind of do my own thing here. Is there some software for using tracking budgets? No, no, no. That's a good question. If your library is using Excel, or your city's using Excel to track your budget, you probably want to go work for another library. No, I didn't say that, but no, they should not be using Excel. They're using these really expensive proprietary types of software programs to do that. And it's, you know, they're expensive, but they're not Excel, because you can do so much more as far as, I didn't show you like how to track your budget. You know, that was just kind of beyond the scope of what we're talking about today. But, you know, within your little divisions, if you want to, you know, track your book budget, yeah, you know, that's fine using Excel, or your part-time hours. Yeah, nothing wrong with that. But on a city level, even on your library administrative level, you probably do not want to be using Excel. So what would you say are items that can be moved? I mean, like within a book budget, really easily. If you wanted to buy more juvenile fiction and less adult nonfiction because the adult nonfiction is not circulating, it's fine. That's not a problem. If you have a line item for databases, if you don't want to, you know, use Gale and you want to go to EBSCO or vice versa, yeah, you can do those kind of things. The dollar amount really doesn't make a whole lot of difference. It's when you start moving between categories, like between personnel and between operations, or between your travel budget and your staffing costs, or whatever it is. I mean, if some conference came up that all of a sudden, no, we didn't budget for it, but we really want people to go. If you're willing to take it out of somewhere else, and you can justify that with probably with your library director and your finance director, because the amounts are not going to be huge. You know, they can do that. They're going to have to, you know, write that up, and they're going to need a paper trail. So when you do your mid-year adjustments, it's going to show up that you legally did this and it was all above board, rather than you just decided to go to Bali for, you know, the Indonesian Library Association conference. That was not anywhere on your books. So yeah, but you can do it. It's just, you want to be as transparent as you can about it. Would I care to give my opinion on what I would do if I were still a library director in a library? No, because I am not a library director anymore. And I think maybe I kind of, you know, gave that right to say what I might do, because it's real easy for me to talk about it. But if I'm not actually going to do it, well then, you know, I'm just talking. I'm just, you know, whatever I'm doing. So, and you know, I wouldn't want to actually say something either that might make it sound like I'm second guessing whatever your library director might be doing. I mean, I'm sure they're all doing fine jobs. So, you know, it's cool, but no, I can't really say that what I would do as a library director just because I'm not. Yeah, if some of you that are not in a general fund, if you're a special district, you've got, you know, probably the most latitude of anyone. Again, it's cool if you're in a special district. I mean, now it's probably a good time to be in one. I think if you're in, again, one of the JPA libraries, again, you've got that property tax money, but exactly how you want to spend it, you're going to have to get their approval, I would assume, of your JPA board, you know, because they're in your de facto city council or your county supervisor. But, you know, if your director can get their okay, their buy-off on it, that's cool. Yeah, I mean, I really am saying that if you ask for permission, it's going to be up to your city manager. Could be your library director, could be your finance director. They're ultimately going to say, yes, you know, you can do that. This looks above board. If you can justify, yeah, well then try to do it. Can you talk a little bit about how a yearly budget is finalized? Yeah, that's easy. I mean, and this is the kind of thing, if you look at that big old budget book, or you look online at your city, your county, your library's budget, at the very beginning of it, it's going to explain the budget process very clearly. And generally what they're going to say is that, you know, got these public input meetings and your people come up with these key indicators and performance matrices. The finance manager does this and that and whatever else. But ultimately, it's going to say that, you know, you present your budget to the city council, like at a first reading. And these are formal, you know, council meetings. And, you know, I don't know about in your cities, but, you know, a lot of council people, they're reading the budget, you know, for the first time at that meeting. But the meetings are fairly short. They're going to trust your city managers, usually. They might have a pet project for, you know, for the most part, they're going to approve 95% of it, but they're going to say, we're going to come back in 2 weeks and we're going to have our next reading of the budget. And they're going to come back in 2 weeks and they're going to have, they might ask you a question, they might not ask you a question. And they can nitpick at some line items and they can completely care less about others. So, and generally they schedule 3 of these meetings, and then at the 3rd meeting, they're actually formally going to approve the budget. And then you're going to see all these resolutions coming out of your city, your council. And we have formally approved this budget as it was written. And you know, that's what the process formally happens. But really all the, you know, where the sausage is really made is at the negotiating tables with your department heads. In your, you know, whether it's your county departments, you know, when you're fighting over, especially if you're in a general fund, how can I get more money for my people? I mean, that's natural. I think that's right. That's proper for you to fight for your department. But, you know, that's tough. I mean, how a budget gets communicated, you know, that really is a job if you're in administration, to tell you that, you know, this is what's happening in the process. And is there a budget software, or will you convert it? No, whatever budget software, assuming it's usually a proprietary type of thing. It's not based on Excel for sure. you may be able to download things into Excel so you can manipulate it at home, but the back end of these, your budget enterprise software at where you work, these are things that are very expensive. Have I ever built a zero-based budget? No, actually, I never have, because I've always found that, at least where I work, if there was money left over at the end, we could put into our reserve. So I did not feel, I tried to balance, obviously I would have a balanced budget, but to try to get it, so that every penny matches, everything I spent matched up with every revenue I had. No, it wasn't. Aerosmith, yes, of course. Yeah, there were some, and some people send questions only to the panelists. So that's why maybe you're not seeing all of the questions. How do you ease the mind of staff when you have offered them as contact traces and your library locations as COVID testing sites? Generally, at least the contact traces generally don't work in a hot zone. They can basically, I think they can do that for anything as far as the COVID testing site. Again, I don't know, you've got to, in some ways, what I've been doing just is, trusting the data and the facts. And when I would feel comfortable with it, well, then that's when I would say yes. And if I wasn't feeling comfortable with it, I would ask questions and find out, maybe get to the point of why, what am I not comfortable with, and then go from that. Oh yeah, Beth said no. Yeah, absolutely. Spending grant money for other purposes is, Beverly Schwartzberg will personally come after you if you do that, and you don't want that to happen. Okay, so I'm not sure if maybe I've got to everyone. I'm just going to go up one more time, and I personally don't have anything else to do, so I'll stay all afternoon if you want. Yeah, there's a statement here about, concerns of libraries looking essential in part of this budget fight. I think that, police and fire, they can make a pretty good case. I think some of public works can make a pretty good case. That's why I think the libraries that are thinking about, well, what else can we do? Reinvent what the sense of community is. If you can clearly articulate what that might look like, yeah, I think that becomes pretty essential in a lot of places. Again, if you're just maybe trying to do some new things that haven't been done before, well then, more power to you. Okay, here's a question about like revenue. Yeah, for those of you that are doing passports, if it's just going, directly into the city or the county's general fund, okay. I personally, gosh, my second guessing the director, yeah, maybe I am, but if I were going to be setting up the side hustles, passports, for example, I probably would try to make it clear that if we're going to do this, it's going to come into the library's fund. See if they might say, okay. Or all they're going to do is say no, and then at that point, yeah, how much do you want to have a service of passports at, just offering up out of the goodness of your library heart, I guess. Panda money, yeah, I like that. That's a great side hustle, but yeah, again, it's just, I think, another good example of the question about where the other 79% comes from. I'm going to assume that, for example, in the case of the Pasadena Public Library, if 21% is coming from that library tax, the other 79%, it's a combination of general fund. I know Pasadena does a lot of big grants, so I think that's just another source of revenue. And I don't think maybe they do their fines and fees, but that's again that's what Michelle is doing, for example, is figuring out where that other 79% is coming from. Oil money, that's nice. If you want, yeah, I'll PDF the PowerPoint. Yeah, sure, you're more than welcome to have that. And I think looks like it's about it. So with that, I'm just going to say again, thank you all so much. I hope this didn't raise more questions.